So for this section of the lesson, I'm going to show you 4 really, really famous blues guitar licks, and I'm just going to show you, the main goal of this is to show you how they work with the DNA phrases, kind of give you an idea of when you start using the DNA phrases in real music, what do they look like in action. So for each lick, I'm going to demonstrate a really simplified version of the lick, because any of these can be kind of spun out into more complicated forms, but I'll give you kind of a simplified version to start with. And then I'll go into a little bit of the theory of how the lick is constructed and like where it came from and why I named it the way I did. I'll then go into some famous examples of each lick, some really famous songs that use it like in the hook or somewhere in the solo, examples you're almost certain to recognize. Next, after that, I'll give you examples of how to use each one of these licks in a solo. Does it go at the end of a lick? Does it go in the middle of a lick? Do you work it in with certain other types of phrases? What does it sound like? What does it mean? All those sorts of things. And last of all, I'll give you some exercises for each lick to kind of, get your creativity going and to get your fingers used to playing it and using it improvisationally. So, let's focus in on the fretboard right now and go into the first lick. So the first lick I want to go over is called the blues rock scrunch. At least that's what I call it. Let me give you a demo of it real quick. Now I'm sure at least a couple of people who have played blues rock are going to sort of recognize that shape really, really quickly, because it's in all over the place. I call it the scrunch because there's a fiddle technique called a scrunch, and it basically is using the open strings to close a really small interval gap. Fiddle players all the time kind of use these open strings to kind of like ground them in the key they're in. So if I was like playing on the B string, I could play like an E minor pentatonic scale. And then use the open E string to kind of, mess around with melodies. And then they'll do something like this. And they'll mess around with the close interval there. That D to that E is kind of a crunchy interval. And they'll kind of just, or they'll even do it over a half step. They'll do it over, kind of sounds how a lot of Appalachian songs start. They'll start with an effect like something zippy like that, and that crunchy effect of the intervals between the strings, they call it a scrunch. So this is kind of the blues rock scrunch. And in terms of like DNA phrases, this is sort of the shuffle cadence transposed over itself a few times. The notes of it, you'll start with the D right there, the E on the B string, and then the A up here on the high E string. So you're talking the 7th fret of the G string, the 5th fret of the B string, and the 5th fret of the E string. So you've got, I usually use my pointer finger to bar here, and then my ring finger to kind of ground me here. And then this G right here on the B string is also important. So your box for this lick is sort of... And the main thing you're doing here is you're bending between, you're closing that whole step right there between this D and this E. You're using these 2 fingers to kind of bend the G string up to match the E. And then you're using these 3 fingers here, or if you want to, you can use those 2 fingers there, to kind of make this G match this A. And if you look at it, really, the main notes you are focused on are this E, this G, and this A. So it's kind of like... Remember that from the DNA phrase? And the key with this lick is that when people actually use it in music, it twists up and down within itself. It can go all kinds of different directions. So really, in terms of the way it fits with the DNA phrase theory, is it's kind of like... this minor 4th pentatonic box, the E, the G, and the A, just kind of moving in all sorts of different directions. But these scrunches really emphasize those notes and the way that box moves. So that's kind of how it identifies itself with the blues sound. If you want like a really famous example of where this song, where this lick is used in a song, if you know "Gimme All Your Lovin'" by ZZ Top. Right there in the hook at the beginning of the song. It's kind of like the lick that defines it. It's kind of moved up from down here. It's moved up to C minor, but... See how that kind of fits in the box we were in before? And speaking of boxes, usually when you play this lick, it's almost always grounded in sort of the root box of the minor pentatonic scale. I call it pentatonic box number 1. People like to do it up here in E minor a lot. So very common to play it there. It's also very common to play it A minor, but you can really do it anywhere. Anywhere you can move that minor pentatonic scale, which is really anywhere on the neck, this lick works really well. And it fits in some of the other boxes, but it's not nearly as common to use it there. Usually, even when people use this in solos, they'll move the minor pentatonic box to the root of whatever chord they're playing. So, if you're in A and you're playing, the 1 chord, they'll play the box right there. But then once they go to the 4 chord, they'll move that box right up to the to where the root of that chord is. It's the D. The root box moves up to D, and then they'll use the lick up there. So it tends to follow the minor pentatonic root box, just as a matter of habit. And the thing about this lick, the way it gets the most action in music is sort of as a way of like expressing ecstasy, or like just like extreme, like, oh yeah, this is awesome kind of feeling in solos. I think my favorite place that this is used in the Sweet Child of Mine solo. The Sweet Child of Mine solo really starts at, it starts out in this in that E flat minor pentatonic. It's a really, really dark key. It's a really kind of dissonant scale for rock solos. So, Slash is kind of finding his way through the solo. It's all, real kind of twisty and minor pentatonic and stuff. And then when he gets to the big part at the end, he starts, if he eventually gets to the minor pentatonic part, it's sort of the most like exciting part of the solo. And he goes right into a lick, that uses that box right there. And that's kind of the part where he's just kind of letting it all loose and just being like, minor pentatonic shredding stuff. And you're going to find almost any solo that this lick is used in, that's kind of how it goes. It's kind of a way that like blues rockers used to just say, yeah, this is something just easy. I just like to shred over this and it's really fun. That's kind of where it tends to go in solos. So bear that in mind as you use it for improvisation and for writing things. My recommendation for getting used to this, the trickiest thing about this box is getting these bends really, really clean. So what you got to be really good at doing is bending the right distance so that this note matches that note. So usually what I do is I say, start with this first. Start with your pointer finger on the 5th fret of the B string and your ring finger on the 7th fret of the G string. And I also will usually plant my middle finger on the G string because it gives you a little more strength. And I'll also try to kind of wrap my thumb around the neck when I'm doing this stuff because it kind of gives me a little more leverage. I can kind of turn my hand like this and get a little more leverage from my thumb. But you really want to get good at making the distance of this bend really accurate. Being able to kind of close that from being able to get right to that unison when you want to and being able to control that. And it's good to be able to control it at different speeds too, being able to go slow and being able to do it quick. Like that, kind of like in Johnny B. Goode. The Johnny B. Goode solo also uses this box a lot. So the first thing you want to do is get good at moving between the B and the G strings, and then you want to work between the E and the B strings. Same thing. And some people will stretch out their fingers and kind of use the same 2 fingers to bend. I like to use my pinky here. But same thing. You want to be able to do this bend really slowly. You want to be able to do it really quickly. And be really comfortable with it. And then once you start to get really, really sophisticated with it, you can start to move it around the neck just for the scrunch effect. There's a song by it's American Hi-Fi, Flavor of the Week. He uses it kind of right before the solo. He kind of winds up the neck going. Before the solo, he kind of winds up the neck doing that scrunch technique. And you can do that on the E or the B string. You can kind of go... You can move that all over the neck through scales, all kinds of stuff. That's a pretty common technique to do as well, to kind of extend this box. So try to get used to those as much as you can, and then the more ways you can find to kind of twist through this box creatively, the better off you're going to be, because you have a couple of ways you can get around between the strings. You can kind of go right over the strings, just kind of picking through them. And you don't have to go like from sequence string to string. You can kind of skip around. You can go from the E string to the G string to the B string, back to the G string. People, when they solo with this, they go in all different orders between the strings. So that's one good thing to mess with when you're jamming with it. And another thing to do is you kind of mix that with moving by bends and sort of like sweeping over the strings. You know, when I do that motion, I'll kind of bend to the first note, but then I'll just kind of sweep over the next two notes, and then kind of can use the pull off between the G and the E right there to kind of make things more complicated. I can bend up. I can bend up and then pull off. There's all kinds of ways to twist up the motions of this, but those are just some suggestions for things to mess with. Really what you want to do is just take all those ideas and put them in a blender and get really, really comfortable with as many of the licks within that fundamental like blues rock scrunch lick as you can, so that when you're really soloing, your brain can just go crazy and you're always going to find yourself landing on notes that work. So now I think we're ready to go on to the next lick, which is the Robert Johnson cadence. So the second really famous lick I really want to cover is what I call the Robert Johnson cadence. I don't know if Robert Johnson invented it, but he probably used it more famously than any other blues player. It looks a little bit like this in its most basic form. And the way it's broken up is there's two DNA phrases that it uses. It uses kind of the descending chromatic third that you get in the major pentatonic, that goes like this. By the way, we're in A major pentatonic, so you're going down from the fifth, which is E, to the major third, which is the C sharp, just filling it in chromatically. And then you end the lick with that hammer version of the blues third, going from C to C sharp and resolving down to A, which is the root. And you kind of split end them by going E, D sharp, D. Then you skip to the C and flick to the C sharp and down to the A. That's what I would think of as being sort of the most basic form of the lick. But when it actually gets played, you know, there's different ways it comes across. You know, this is another way it's played a lot. You know, Big Billy Brunsey would play it sort of like that. Of course, Robert Johnson had his own very characteristic way of playing it. But the key is that anything that's got that chromatic lick kind of chained into that hammered version of the blues third is going to qualify. But of course, there's different ways of resolving the phrase too. Once you've done that C to the C sharp, or the minor third to the major third, you can resolve it down to the root. You can resolve it up to the root. You can resolve it to the fifth. There's different ways to resolve that phrase, but in general, it's sort of a resolution phrase. That's the big key about it. And you know, a couple of famous songs that really use it, like Guitar Boogie by Arthur Smith, has this lick all over it. He plays it exactly like this. You know, he plays that all over that song. There's probably 5 or 6 sections of that song that have that lick played exactly like that in the song. And of course, Robert Johnson, you know, he's got a whole group of songs that are all done in A major fingering. The songs aren't actually in A major because of where his guitar is tuned, but you know, like Kind-Hearted Woman and Dust My Broom, and I think 5 or 6 other songs that are in the complete Robert Johnson collection all use the same set of phrases. And the phrase looks a little bit like this. He'll start the song out sort of like right when he goes, and then resolves to the E major chord. It's sort of the Robert Johnson way of playing it, and you'll find that in a whole bunch of his songs. You can't miss it. There's a couple of things about the way you play this lick that you really want to know. This lick is pretty strongly associated with Southern styles of playing. You know, the Kentucky flat pickers would use it all the time. The Delta blues players would use it a lot. Now, of course, because of their influence, it's found its way in a lot of other players' music. But it's very kind of identified with Southern styles of blues. So that's just one thing you want to be aware of, I think, as you articulate it. And I mean, there's different ways to get through it. You can see from all those different ways that I played it there, different players have found their own way to put their stamp on it. So I would recommend you do the same. As long as it has that sort of the same, you know, descends chromatically somewhere in the voice, has the major blue third, and resolves to some sort of note. It's more of a way of resolving tension in a phrase than in creating it. You know, even though, you know, in Guitar Boogie, Arthur Smith uses it sort of in the middle of the phrases a lot, it sort of ends a sort of micro phrase within a phrase. It sort of brings the energy of the line down rather than creating it. So that's just a thing to be aware of as far as its phrasing goes. Obviously, like any other lick, you can kind of suspend it in the middle, but people tend to think of this as being more of an ending than a beginning. So just be aware of that as you integrate things into it. This lick is very flexible. It can work in a lot of different places on the neck. It's not so much like the blues rock scrunch or some of these other licks that really want to be stuck in one place because of the bends. So what I'd recommend is go back to the DNA exercises and find every place where sort of where that chromatic descending third shows up, and just try to find different places to resolve it in all the scale boxes, because that's going to help you find your own identity. Is just taking that DNA exercise, but then just sort of messing with it creatively. Is like saying, okay, I know that this kind of more complex lick, is in these boxes, and everywhere you find, anywhere you find that descending chromatic phrase, you're going to be able to use this lick. Maybe not equally over every chord, but if you're just playing over a drone or over just like a one chord, you can definitely just mess with this and see what's going to work over a one chord. It's a really good way to start. But then what you want to do is find that lick, find a way to articulate where in whatever box you're playing, and then find, do I want to resolve it that way? Do I want to go, do I want to resolve it? Do I want to just channel it out into some other lick? Find other ways to end it, other ways to kind of share the notes between different strings. It's a really good way to explore this and kind of work it into whatever style that you play. Whatever kind of other techniques you can put on those basic set of notes, it's going to work really well for you. All right, that covers this lick. Let's go on to the next one, which is what I call the blues turn. So the next lick I want to go over is what I call the blues turn. In its most simple form, I'd say it looks kind of like this. It's just 4 notes. You'll find it, because this lick is so simple, it finds its way into literally every kind of blues I've ever seen. I see this a lot in gospel players, a lot in country music. It gets its action in rock and roll and in old blues stuff too. It's just, this lick finds its way everywhere. And you almost might think it came from the Robert Johnson cadence because they share the same notes. In the Johnson cadence, we came down from the E, D sharp, D, and the key is the D, the C to the C sharp to the A. Is the same notes that we have here. But I see them as kind of being built from different DNA phrases. This one is kind of this chromatic lick coming down. And then the blues third. And this I just think of as being the shuffle cadence. And then the turn kind of nested in the middle. Now, does it actually, do people actually hear it as coming from one of those or the other ones? I don't even really know. Maybe people hear it as coming from both. I don't think it really matters all that much. I think the key is you can see the DNA phrases in it and you see it showing up in real music, so it still kind of fits the whole plan of everything. We'll maybe fuss about the particulars of its construction later, but the one key I want you to see is this is a really good example of a lick that's created by nesting. The shuffle cadence would go, it'd go from the D down to the C and then rest on the A. But instead of just going straight from the C down to the A, it's going to throw the C sharp in the middle. We're going D, C, C sharp, down to A. It's a really clear example of taking that kind of blues third and just kind of sticking it right in the middle of the blues third, in the middle of the shuffle cadence. So it's about the simplest example of nesting I can think of. But this is such an incredibly useful lick. I think my favorite, famous example of where this shows up is in the intro to Johnny B. Goode, as he's kind of coming into the last section of runs. He's going, there's 2 parts in that run that he uses it. He's coming down. Right here, he'll go, there it is right there, but he goes back up to finish the run. And then he ends it with, so you see, he was able to use that lick sort of in the middle of a run to kind of keep it going. And rather than resolving it down to the A, he went up to the E and then back up to the E and kind of back down the run. But then he also sort of ended the phrase with it. So you're going to see this lick, because it's so short, it's incredibly fluid. And I like to use it as a building block within other things. This combines so easily with other phrases. And it can work in a hook. It can work in the middle of the solo just to spice it up. So what I found is because this combines so well with so many other phrases, I've been able to just work it in with the other DNA phrases to make more complex licks really easily. One lick I've been working with lately is I'm taking 3 kinds of blues thirds. I'm taking the sort of minor one with the hammer one with the turn I'm showing you now, I kind of going. I just sort of daisy chained those one into each other, but it kind of makes a neat little run that uses all those in one little space. And the blues third, it just, it begs for stuff like this. Another thing, it's even more concise than that, is to put the chromatic DNA phrase in there. You can go. That's basically, instead of just going, I'm just using that chromatic DNA phrase right at the beginning, and then the last note of the DNA of the chromatic phrase is spliced into the beginning of the blues turn, which is the D. So it's going chromatic right into the bend right there, or the hammer as it were. So the recommendation I have for learning to use this phrase is to go back to the DNA exercises. And this is going to be something we explore in more detail now, but this is going to be sort of your early version of doing our future exercises for blending major and minor. Because this lick uses both a major and a minor DNA phrase, the shuffle cadence is from minor, that particular turn is from major, it's really good to sort of use this to explore the feel between the different pentatonic scales. So what I would do is I would start with my regular DNA exercise. I just start, find your licks, and then find your blues turn, and then just find, okay, how do I combine any one of these licks with that blues turn? I can find some part of the scale that is really close to that blues turn that I did. Say, okay, what DNA licks are going right there? So real quick, I just did all the simple bends in the minor pentatonic. I can find that A to C bend. That's kind of right where I can just try to combine it right then. So I can bend first. So I just got a kind of cool motion of like how I combine that extra bend in there. And what's neat is that bending into that, it's kind of the C bending into the C sharp. So it's almost another way of playing the same lick. So basically from doing that, I just learned a different way I can play this. And those are the kind of discoveries you want to make. You just want to find every place where the blues turn can work. It can work down here too. So then find, one of your pentatonic scales down there, like this one. There's one of the boxes for like the A major pentatonic, and then just start doing DNA licks right around that area and find a way to splice them or nest them in there to see what you can do. And you're going to find it's pretty easy. Because this lick is so simple, there's all kinds of ways you can cram stuff together. So try going over every place you can find the shuffle cadence, or not the shuffle cadence, the blues turn, my mistake. And try to make some third and fourth order phrases that use 3 DNA licks, 4 DNA licks, all in one tiny little space. And you're going to find it's going to really change your soloing a lot. It's one of the best exercises I've ever found for like inventing your own stuff. So the last lick I want to talk about today is what I call the double slide. It's kind of a lame name. If you guys have better ideas, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. But the reason I call it the double slide is because, well, there's 2 slides in it. There's two main ways to play it. If I'm an A major, I'd play it up here like this. Kind of remember that from earlier in the video. The other way you play it is with a bend right there. And I explained this a little bit before, but I'll recap it again. You use this lick when you combine 2 forms of the blues thirds from the major pentatonic scale. One of them is where you kind of hammer up from the C to the C sharp, from the minor third to the major third, and resolve up to the E, to the 5th degree. So you got that one lick there, and then you kind of blur from the minor third down to the major second, and then resolve to the root. And you really got to use that plop motion right there, where you kind of rip down from the minor third to the major second to properly blur it. When you combine them, you get this lick. And you get the same effect pretty much when you bend. So what I'm doing is, I've got my kind of 3 strong fingers, my pointer, middle, and ring here on the 10th, 11th, and 12th frets. And I've got my pinky here on the 12th fret of the E string. And then I'm kind of using these fingers to bend this string a whole step up to C sharp. And then hitting this string while it's still bent. You're holding the bend and then releasing it and resolving down to the A. Hold it, play the E, play it again and release, and you're down. So 2 ways to play it. you can fit this into a lot of different places in the scale, but that's something we're kind of going to explain how to mess with a little bit later. So I think my favorite famous example of this lick is in the hook for AC/DC's Have a Drink on Me. It goes kind of like this. Of course, with a lot more distortion than that, but you're going to kind of see right there. There's our double slide lick right there. Now he does it, I'm pretty sure he does it by kind of sliding across the fret. So you could probably do it as, and I'd place it from there. Now this is one where kind of when you're doing it between the G and the B strings, you kind of have these three fingers set a fret back because it gives you the whole step you need. And what do you know? There's our blues turn right there. Haha, another example of these licks showing up in famous places. What do you know? So this is a lick that really sounds guitaristic incredibly, because this totally comes from guitar playing. It's very much like the blues rock scrunch. It just you're not going to play these licks on any other instrument, and because of the way the bends work, especially that way of just like bending the string, holding it, and then releasing it, it sounds so guitar-like that you really want to kind of use it as a way to kind of to claim your guitarness, and it also kind of gives a solo a vocal quality. So I tend to kind of use this very much the way I use the blues turn as sort of a filler in solos or in hooks, but you do it to kind of make things flow a little bit better and to kind of get a little bit more kind of the stretchy quality that makes guitar solos sound the way they do. So just kind of stick that one in your arsenal and mess with it a lot of different ways. You see this a lot in country music as well. Country music lines use this one all the time. So you're going to have no shortage of it there. The one tricky thing about working this into your playing is that this lick crosses boxes a lot. It doesn't tend to stay in one place very easily, especially when you're sliding to get... that would kind of mix this between being in the minor pentatonic root box of A and being in sort of the major pentatonic root box. Kind of see it's between the two boxes. So what I tend to do when I'm working this lick is I tend to work on flowing out of a lick into other things. I'll find the lick wherever I'm playing it. If I'm playing it down here with the bend. And then right after that, I'll practice filling it to something else, some other lick, or just following the scale out. So now that I've got the riff down, where I try to maybe go back up and say, as long as you can kind of flow out of that lick into other stuff that's in the similar area of the neck, that's really good. And again, if you're crossing boxes with the slide, as long as you can find your way in the new box as soon as you get there, that's the key. So in general, search around between the different boxes, and what you want to look for notes, you want to look for the root triad as much as you can, or whatever chord's going on. You want to look for the notes in the triad of the chord you're playing. Because if we're in the key of A, when I'm sliding up to the C sharp, which is the third of the chord, kind of using the E up here as the pivot point and kind of sliding back down and going to the A. So basically I outlined the notes of the A major triad, A, C sharp, and E. So anywhere those notes show up, I can do this lick. Let's see where we got it down here. If I have the B there and the E's there, I can go, yeah. See, it's not as easy to bend down here on these lower strings, but you've got the space to do it. The lick works right there. So you see what I found is that, I can move between those pentatonic boxes really quickly and just find myself in some other lick, whichever way I played it. And that's where the key of what you want to work on. Whatever chord you're playing over, find the three notes of the root triad, place the lick in and around it, and then try to flow out of it into whatever pentatonic box you wind up in. That's a really, really good improv exercise to get really comfortable with. So that pretty much covers our really famous licks. The next thing we're going to go into is just other general ideas about how to solo. I'm really going to go into the secrets of improvisation and how we start to develop a real musical language with this stuff. Now that we've got, not just the DNA phrases, but all kinds of vocabulary for how to combine them into more interesting licks. So stay tuned for that.